I didn't see it coming. Not at first. Claire had been working late more often than usual, but that wasn't strange for her job. She managed high-stakes corporate projects, and late nights were just part of the deal, or so I thought. Tuesday night, she sent me a casual text. Don't wait up. Late meeting. Grab some dinner without me. I wasn't thrilled. Our evenings had started feeling like two ships passing in the night. But I let it go. I made a frozen pizza, cracked a beer, and settled in to watch TV. She walked in around 11:15, earlier than I expected, but looking flustered. Her hair was slightly mussed, and there was this glow to her, like she'd just finished a workout. I smiled at her, teasing, "Rough meeting, or did they make you run laps in the office?" She chuckled nervously, brushing past me with her work bag slung over her shoulder. "Exhausting," she muttered, disappearing into the bathroom before I could press further. It wasn't until later, when her phone buzzed on the nightstand, that my curiosity turned into something sharper. I glanced at the screen. "You burned 900 calories today. Great job." Her fitness app cheerfully displayed a route she'd taken that evening. The line didn't lead to her office. It ended at a motel just outside of town. I stared at the glowing screen, every nerve in my body screaming at me. A knot twisted in my gut. I told myself I was overreacting. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she'd gone there for a meeting. An unorthodox venue, sure, but not impossible, right? But the little voice in my head wouldn't shut up. You know better. I opened the app and scrolled through a recent activity. Sure enough, there was a pattern. 3 times in the past 2 weeks, her meetings ended at the same place. The same motel. I could barely breathe. My stomach churned with a mix of anger, fear, and nausea. But I knew one thing. I needed proof. Not guesses, not gut feelings, proof. The next late meeting came 2 days later. Claire kissed me goodbye at 7 p.m., her heels clicking on the driveway as she climbed into her car. I watched her drive off, waiting for the ping of her GPS location to pop up on my phone. There it was, a blue dot moving steadily down the highway. My hands shook as I grabbed my jacket and keys. I wasn't waiting this time. I was going to follow her. I drove with the headlights off at first, tailing Claire from a safe distance. My heart raced, pounding so loud it felt like it might shake the steering wheel. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational explanation for all this. Anything but the obvious. But as the miles stretched on, denial became harder to cling to. This wasn't the route to her office. It wasn't the route to any of her usual work haunts. Instead, her blue dot danced steadily toward the outskirts of town, the same direction her fitness app had logged just nights before. The highway stretched ahead, dark and quiet. I couldn't help but think about how much I trusted her. For 10 years, I believed in us. We were the kind of couple people envied, or at least I thought we were. We'd been through life's usual ups and downs, kids, careers, the occasional argument about money or vacations. Nothing dramatic, nothing unfixable. So why did this feel like watching my world collapse? I wanted to stop the car, turn around, and pretend I didn't know anything. Ignorance would have been easier. But I couldn't. I had to know. A flickering neon light came into view as I pulled into the shadow of a row of trees. There was the motel, dingy and nondescript, the kind of place that didn't bother with appearances. Her car was parked in the lot, unmistakable in the glow of the buzzing sign. I parked 2 blocks away, where I could watch without being seen. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I stared at her car, willing her to do something that made sense. Maybe check in for a business meeting, greet some colleagues in suits and ties. But instead, a man opened one of the motel doors. He stood in the doorway for a moment, tall and confident, glancing around like he was expecting someone. Claire's car door opened. She stepped out, smoothing her skirt, then smiled at him. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't the kind of polite smile she gave coworkers or neighbors. It wasn't even the kind of tired half-smile she'd given me lately when I kissed her goodbye. This was the smile of someone stepping into a fantasy, a secret, a lie. She walked to him, and he ushered her inside. The door closed behind them, and my world collapsed. I sat there for what felt like an eternity. My thoughts spiraled. Anger, confusion, heartbreak, each emotion sharper than the last. Had she been unhappy? Had I missed the signs? Or was this just who she was all along? But even in the storm of emotions, one thought cut through. I need proof. If I confronted her now, she'd deny it. She'd spin some story, claim I was paranoid. I'd be the crazy husband who followed his wife to a motel in the dead of night. I needed evidence, something she couldn't talk her way out of. I grabbed my phone and opened the GPS app again. It showed her location still inside that room. My hands shook as I took a screenshot. Then, I made a decision. I walked into the motel lobby, the musty smell of cheap cleaner hitting me like a wall. The clerk barely looked up from his phone. Need a room? Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. One close to the end if you have it. Within minutes, I had the key to the room next to hers. The walls were thin. I could hear muffled voices, laughter, and the unmistakable creak of a bed. My chest tightened. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was devastated. Claire wasn't just betraying me. She was betraying the life we'd built together. Our kids, our home, our vows. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not without a fight. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the wall that separated me from Claire. My mind was a storm of emotions I couldn't escape. Anger like a wildfire, despair like a suffocating weight, and humiliation that burned hotter than all of it. How had it come to this? The muffled sound of laughter seeped through the wall, piercing my ears like needles. Claire's voice, light and playful, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. That tone used to be reserved for me. Back when we were happy. Back when I thought we were solid. The creak of the bed made my stomach turn. I gripped the edge of the mattress, trying to steady myself. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the sheer casualness of it. This wasn't some desperate mistake or moment of weakness. This was deliberate, planned, and rehearsed. I clenched my fists, staring at the room around me. It was a pitiful place, with peeling wallpaper and a lamp that buzzed faintly. A cheap haven for people who didn't care about consequences. People like Claire. The temptation to barge into their room was overwhelming. To kick the door open, catch them in the act, and scream until the whole damn motel heard. But I stopped myself. What would that accomplish? It would make me the angry husband, the fool who lost his temper. No. If Claire was going to destroy our family, she was going to do it under the weight of undeniable proof. Evidence that not even her tears or excuses could erase. I pulled out my phone and hit record. The walls were thin enough to catch snippets of conversation. His voice, low and smooth, was indistinct, but hers carried. "You're impossible," she said, laughing. It wasn't forced. It was the kind of laugh that used to light up our kitchen on lazy Saturday mornings. How long has she been giving him what I thought was mine? The ache in my chest deepened, but I didn't let myself crumble. Not yet. I scanned their shared wall, searching for anything I could use. My eyes landed on a small vent near the floor. I crouched down, angling my phone's camera to peek through. The slats were narrow, but I could see enough. 2 wine glasses sat on the nightstand, lipstick smudging one. Clothes were scattered across the chair and floor, hers mixed with his. The bed frame squeaked, and I looked away, disgusted. This wasn't a movie or a crime drama. This was my life being unraveled. Every laugh, every touch on the other side of that wall felt like an arrow through my chest. I thought about the vows we'd made, how she had promised to choose me, to honor and protect what we built. For years, I had believed those words, even during the rough patches. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, because that's what love is supposed to be, trust. But love without honesty is a house built on sand. And tonight I was watching it collapse. The minutes stretched into hours. They came and went in waves of laughter and silence. Eventually, their door opened, and I watched from the window as Claire and the man stepped outside. She leaned into him, smiling as they whispered goodbye. 2 cars started, and 2 cars drove away. I sat there, paralyzed, until their taillights disappeared. Then I moved. I slipped into their room, the lingering smell of perfume and wine hitting me like a slap. My hands trembled as I took photos of everything. The wine glasses, the rumpled bed, the discarded clothes. This wasn't just betrayal. It was arrogance, Claire hadn't even tried to hide it. She thought I'd never catch her. But I had. And now, I was going to make sure she paid for it. I didn't leave the motel room right away. I couldn't. I stood in the middle of the wreckage of their rendezvous, wrinkled sheets, half-empty wine glasses, and the faint scent of her perfume still hanging in the air. It was the same perfume she wore on our anniversary last month. The thought made my stomach churn. I stared at the bed. My bed. At least, that's what it used to be. We'd bought one just like it when we moved into our first home, joking about how it'd be the place where we'd solve all the world's problems. It wasn't the bed itself, of course. It was what it represented. Comfort, intimacy, trust. All of it shattered. I moved around the room, my phone camera clicking in rhythmic flashes. Photos of their wine glasses, her heels kicked under the chair, his tie draped over the backrest. I snapped a picture of the condom wrapper they'd tossed near the trash, half-heartedly trying to hide it. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My head throbbed as questions hammered at my mind. How long has this been going on? How could she look me in the eye, kiss our kids goodnight, and then come here? What did he give her that I couldn't? That last thought hit like a sucker punch. For the first time, doubt crept in alongside the anger. Was I enough? Was I ever? Had I missed signs, ignored her unhappiness, gotten too caught up in work or fatherhood to notice the cracks in our marriage? No, this wasn't my fault. She could have talked to me. She could have told me if she felt unloved, unfulfilled, or whatever excuse she'd used to justify this. But instead, she chose this, sneaking around, turning our life into a lie. I grabbed the fitness app on her phone earlier, scrolling through more than just her activity. The pattern was clearer now, stretching back weeks, maybe months. Each late meeting was another excuse, another waypoint leading to places I'd never been allowed to see. The full weight of her betrayal settled over me. I wasn't just losing Claire. I was losing the story I'd told myself about us, about what we were, who she was, who I was in her eyes. I stopped taking pictures and sat on the edge of the bed. My head dropped into my hands, the gravity of everything sinking in. In that moment, I didn't feel anger or resolve, just hollow. But then I thought of our kids. Emma and Noah didn't know anything yet. They were at home, sleeping soundly, blissfully unaware that their family was coming apart. I thought about the lies Claire must have told them, the excuses she'd made when she wasn't there for dinner or bedtime stories. And I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her win. This wasn't just about me anymore. I stood and took a deep breath. Claire might have started this, but I was going to finish it. I walked out of the room and drove home in silence, the photos and GPS data backed up to my cloud account. Every piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of her lies. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Inside, the kids' backpacks were still in the hallway, their shoes by the door. I stood there for a moment, staring at the life we'd built together. Claire had been willing to burn it all down for some thrill, some stranger. I didn't know what kind of person could do that. But I did know one thing. When the truth came out, she wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose everything. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Claire moving around the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air, the cheerful clink of cups on the counter like nails on a chalkboard to my nerves. She was humming, as if nothing had happened. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My chest felt heavy, like someone had placed a cinder block on it overnight. The images from the motel replayed in my mind in vivid detail. Her laugh, his shadow, the wreckage of their room. I could still smell the cheap wine and stale air of betrayal clinging to my clothes. Claire's voice carried down the hallway. "Breakfast is ready," she called, like it was any other day. It wasn't. I rolled out of bed, dragging my feet to the bathroom. I avoided the mirror. I didn't want to see the look in my own eyes, the mix of fury, heartbreak, and disbelief. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to drown the emotions clawing at my chest. By the time I walked into the kitchen, Claire was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and gave me a bright smile. "Morning. Did you sleep okay?" Her tone was so casual, so normal it made my stomach turn. "Yeah," I lied, taking a seat across from her. I couldn't look her in the eye, not without my hands shaking. The trust one once felt so natural, so effortless, was gone. She wasn't my wife anymore. Not really. She was a stranger. A stranger who shared my home, my bed, my kids. She took a sip of coffee, completely at ease. "I've got another meeting tonight," she said. "Big deadline coming up." There it was. The audacity. She didn't even flinch. "Oh, another late one?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. I'd spent the drive home last night rehearsing this. How to act, what to say. Every word had to count. "Yeah," she said, smiling at me like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. "Don't wait up, okay?" I nodded, forcing a tight smile. Inside, my mind screamed. How long has she been lying to me like this? How many times have I smiled back, completely blind? The kids came barreling into the kitchen, their laughter breaking the tension I was trying to hide. They chatted about school and weekend plans while Claire packed their lunches, her movements seamless, like this was the picture-perfect family life we were supposed to have. But it wasn't. Not anymore. I watched her laugh with them, watch her kiss Noah on the forehead and ruffle Emma's hair. How could she compartmentalize so easily? How could she kiss them goodnight, knowing she was about to rip their world apart? When the kids left for school, I stayed behind, sipping my coffee in silence. Claire lingered, checking her emails. She glanced up at me, noticing my stillness. "You okay?" she asked, her voice light, but with a flicker of concern. I looked at her, really looked at her. For a moment, I considered laying it all out, the GPS logs, the photos, the truth that was now a gaping wound between us. I wanted to confront her, to make her explain herself, to watch her scramble for excuses that I'd already dismantled. But I didn't. Not yet. "I'm fine," I said, my voice even. "Just a little tired." She smiled again, that same smile that used to make me feel like the luckiest man alive. Now, it felt like a mask she wore to hide the rot underneath. As she walked out the door, I stayed at the table, gripping my mug so tightly I thought it might shatter. Tonight, I'll watch her leave. I'll follow her again, and when the time is right, I'll make sure she knows exactly what she's done to me, to us, to this family. And when it's over, she won't just lose me. She'll lose every lie she's been living behind. By the time the clock hit 6 p.m., I was ready. Claire had been busy all day, rushing through calls, sending emails, and humming while she moved around the house. She was perfectly at ease. I couldn't decide if that made me angrier or just sad. When she finally stepped into the bedroom to get ready, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. She stood in front of the mirror applying lipstick, a shade I hadn't seen her wear for me in years. "Meeting with anyone important?" I asked casually, leaning against the doorway. She glanced at me through the mirror and smiled. "Just the usual team. You know how it is." I nodded, letting her lie roll off her tongue like water. She didn't hesitate, didn't stutter. It was so effortless that I almost admired it. Almost. When she kissed me goodbye, I felt a strange, bitter satisfaction. Let her play her part. Let her keep lying. This time, I wasn't just following her. I was finishing this. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, her taillights disappearing around the corner. My hands trembled as I grabbed my keys, but not from nerves. No, this was something colder, sharper, a sense of purpose. I tailed her from a distance, the blue of her Jeep my silent guide. The route was the same as before, winding down the highway toward that dingy motel. The familiarity of it made my stomach churn. She wasn't even trying to be discreet. It wasn't long before I saw her car again, parked under the same flickering sign. She got out, her heels clicking against the asphalt, and adjusted her skirt before heading toward the room. The same man from before opened the door, his silhouette backlit by the dull glow of the room's single lamp. This time, I parked closer. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was preparing. I waited until the motel door closed behind her, until I was certain they were settled in. Then I moved. My heart thudded in my chest, but my mind was clear, sharp. The manager at the desk barely glanced up when I walked in. I'd paid him extra the last time, ensuring I could get the room next to hers whenever I needed it. Tonight, I wasn't asking, I was demanding. Room key in hand, I stepped into the dim space. It was the same as last time. Cheap wallpaper, a buzzing lamp, and walls thin enough to hear every betrayal that unfolded on the other side. I I set up my phone against the vent, angling it perfectly to catch everything. Her laughter was clearer now, every inflection a dagger in my chest. His voice was low, murmuring things I couldn't make out, but didn't need to. The tone was enough. Intimate, familiar, forbidden. I sat on the bed, my head in my hands as their conversation filtered through. They were talking about the next time they'd meet, laughing about the risks they were taking. "She has no idea," Claire said, her voice light, almost gleeful. "He trusts me completely." I froze. Trust. That was the word she used, as if it were something to mock, to dismiss. The foundation of our marriage wasn't just cracked, it was pulverized. For a moment, I wanted to storm into their room, to confront her with everything I'd heard, everything I'd seen. But then I thought about the kids, the life we'd built, and the fallout of losing control. Instead, I stood, steadying my breathing. I recorded everything I needed, ensuring there'd be no room for denials or half-truths when this was over. And as I stood in the room, listening to the laughter on the other side of the wall, I made a promise to myself. This would be the last time she'd lie to me. The last time she'd step out of our home to betray everything we'd built. By the time I walked out of the motel, I wasn't the same man who had walked in. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was war. The drive home felt surreal, the images and sounds from the motel replaying in my mind like a cursed film reel. The evidence was all there, photos, recordings, GPS logs, each a piece of the life I'd never wanted to know existed. When I parked in the driveway, the house looked the same as it always did, warm, inviting, the porch light glowing softly in the evening fog. But I couldn't see it as home anymore. It was a facade like Claire's smile, hiding the lies festering inside. I stepped inside quietly, half expecting the house to feel different, but everything was unnervingly normal. The kids' backpacks were by the door, their art projects from school still on the counter. I brushed my fingers over Noah's half-painted dinosaur, and for the first time, the weight of what was coming truly hit me. This wasn't just about Claire and me. It never had been. I climbed the stairs and checked their rooms. Emma was asleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. Noah had kicked off his blankets, his small foot sticking out over the edge of the bed. I tucked them both in, lingering longer than usual. They didn't ask for this. They don't deserve this. In our bedroom, Claire wasn't back yet. The bed was perfectly made on her side, as if she'd never left, a mockery of the truth. I sat on my side, staring at her empty pillow. I used to think of it as hers, something uniquely tied to her presence. Now, it felt like a placeholder for someone I didn't even know anymore. I opened my laptop and uploaded everything, the photos, the videos, the GPS logs. I wasn't just compiling evidence. I was building a case. For the kids. For the house. For my dignity. The last thing I uploaded was the recording from the vent, Claire's voice echoing in my headphones. "He trusts me completely." The words stung, raw and personal. They unraveled the last thread of what I'd been holding on to, the fragile belief that there was some version of her that still respected me. She came home just after midnight. I heard her car pull into the driveway, the soft creak of the door as she stepped inside. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, pausing in the kitchen. I stayed where I was, waiting. When she entered the bedroom, she jumped, startled to see me sitting there in the dark. "Jesus, you scared me," she said, flipping on the light. She looked polished, composed, every hair in place, not a wrinkle in her clothes. She dropped her bag by the door and gave me a faint smile. "You're still up? Couldn't sleep?" I said, my voice even. She walked over, leaning down to kiss my forehead. I flinched before I could stop myself. Her eyes narrowed, just for a second, but she quickly covered it with a soft laugh. "Long day?" she asked, slipping off her shoes and heading to the bathroom. I didn't answer. I just watched her, the way she moved as if nothing was wrong, as if her world hadn't shifted on its axis. Maybe hers hadn't. Maybe mine was the only one crumbling. When the bathroom door closed, I pulled out my phone, her GPS log still open, her route to the motel fresh on the screen. My thumb hovered over the photos, the videos. For a moment, I considered sending it all to her right then and there, watching her face as her lies unraveled in front of her. But I didn't. I needed to be patient, calculated. She'd burned our trust to ashes, but I wasn't going to let her walk away from the consequences. Not yet. The bathroom light flicked off, and Claire climbed into bed beside me. She sighed, turning away, her back to me. "Good night," she said softly. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. "Good night," I replied, my voice cold and distant. It was the last time I'd say those words to her without her knowing the truth. The days that followed were a careful dance. I played my part, pretending not to notice the late-night meetings, the glances at her phone, the way her demeanor softened when she thought no one was watching. Claire had perfected the act of a devoted wife, and I let her think it was still working. But inside, I was a storm waiting to break. Every moment I spent around her, every shared dinner or passing kiss, felt like walking on broken glass. I analyzed her every move, dissecting every word. Was she texting him while sitting across from me? Was she thinking about him when she smiled at our kids? The weight of it all threatened to crush me, but I refused to let it. Not yet. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then quickly flipped it over. My stomach twisted. "Work?" I asked casually, not looking away from the screen. "Yeah," she said too quickly. "Nothing important." The tension in her voice betrayed her, and I almost smiled at how obvious it was. I didn't press. Instead, I leaned back, letting the silence grow between us. I could feel her discomfort, the way she shifted slightly, her focus no longer on the show. She excused herself to the kitchen, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. It was a small crack, but it was there. The mask she wore, so carefully crafted, was starting to slip. The next day, I decided to test her. "Emma's class has a play tomorrow night," I said over breakfast. "I was thinking we could go together." Claire froze mid-bite, her eyes darting toward the calendar hanging on the wall. She hesitated just for a moment before forcing a smile. "Oh, I'd love to, but I've got another late meeting," she said. "Big project deadline. You know how it is." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, I burned with the confirmation I didn't need. "Of course," I said. "Work comes first." She relaxed, her smile returning to full strength. I smiled back, but it wasn't real. I wasn't a husband accommodating his wife's busy schedule. I was the hunter letting the prey believe it was still safe. That evening, as she got ready for her meeting, I leaned against the bedroom doorframe, watching her. She didn't notice me at first, too focused on her reflection as she adjusted her earrings. "You look nice," I said, my tone casual. She glanced at me through the mirror, her smile faltering for half a second. "Thanks," she said lightly. "Just trying to look professional." "Of course," I said, nodding. "Gotta make a good impression." Her laugh was forced. I could see the faint tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers hesitated on her necklace clasp. She felt it, the shift in me, the subtle distance that wasn't there before. She kissed me goodbye, her lips brushing mine with all the warmth of a stranger. I followed her again that night, but this time, I didn't stop at watching. After she disappeared into the motel room, I made a phone call to the private investigator I'd hired earlier that week. "It's happening now," I said. "Room 214. You know what to do." "On it," the investigator replied. I sat in my car, staring at the motel, waiting. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about precision. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Every lie she told tightening the noose around her charade. I knew she wouldn't see it coming. Claire came home later that night, her hair slightly out of place, her smile the same practiced one she'd been giving me for weeks. "Hey," she said, slipping off her heels. "Everything okay here?" "Of course," I replied, my voice calm and steady. I didn't tell her that everything she'd done that night, every word, every step, every touch, was now in the hands of someone who'd make sure there was no way out for her. She kissed me goodnight and climbed into bed, her back to me as she drifted off. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, counting down the days until her world fell apart. The morning after her latest meeting, Claire was all smiles again. She breezed through breakfast, chatting about Emma's upcoming play and asking Noah about his science project as though nothing had happened. She even kissed me on the cheek as she cleared the dishes. Thanks for being so understanding about work lately, she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sincerity that made my stomach churn. I nodded, forcing a small smile. Anything for you. If she noticed the edge in my tone, she didn't show it. Her mask was firmly in place, her lies so ingrained they seemed second nature. But I wasn't the same man who'd kissed her goodbye 2 weeks ago, blind to what she'd been doing. Every moment in her presence felt like standing on a fault line, waiting for the ground to split beneath my feet. I was ready for the fallout, and I wasn't leaving anything to chance. That afternoon, I met with the private investigator at a coffee shop. He slid a manila folder across the table, the corners worn from handling. "This is everything," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Photos, timestamps, audio recordings. If you need me to testify, just let me know." I opened the folder, my breath hitching as I flipped through the pages. Claire's smiling face stared back at me, captured in stark detail as she entered and left the motel. There were photos of her and the man in close embrace, their laughter frozen in time. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening on the edges of the folder. Seeing the evidence laid out like this, it made everything feel sharper, more real. "You've got her," the investigator added, his voice low. "This is airtight." I nodded, closing the folder and slipping it into my bag. I thanked him, left the cafe, and drove straight to my lawyer's office. Claire came home early that evening, surprising me. I was in the living room, the manila folder tucked safely in my desk drawer. She plopped down on the couch beside me, her expression unusually soft. "Can we talk?" she asked, folding her hands in her lap. My heart raced, but I kept my face neutral. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the floor. "I feel like we've been a little disconnected lately." I blinked, caught off guard by the audacity of her words. "Disconnected?" The sheer nerve of it almost made me laugh. "I've been busy with work," she continued, her voice carefully measured. "And I know that's been hard on us, but I want to make it better." "Better?" I repeated, my tone calm but cold. She nodded, leaning closer. "I miss us, the way we used to be." I stared at her, the weight of her lies pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to call her out right there, to pull the folder from the drawer and lay everything on the table. But I held back. "I miss that too," I said softly. She smiled, relief washing over her face. "Maybe we could plan a date night? Something to reconnect." "Sure," I said, my voice steady. "Let's do that." She leaned in to kiss me, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I let her kiss me, let her think everything was fine. But inside, I was counting the hours until the meeting with my lawyer, until the papers were drawn up, until the weight of her betrayal finally crushed her perfect little charade. That night, as Claire slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about everything we'd built together, the life we'd shared, the love we'd once had. I thought about the kids, how this would change their world forever. And then I thought about her laughing with another man, mocking the trust I'd given her so freely. There was no fixing this. No reconnecting. She crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Tomorrow, I would set everything in motion. I turned my head to look at her, her face peaceful in the glow of the moonlight. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness. Not for her, but for what we'd lost. Then I turned away, closing my eyes. Let her sleep soundly tonight. It would be the last peaceful night she'd ever have. The morning dawned bright and cold, the kind of day where the world outside looked crisp and perfect while your insides felt like a storm. Claire was in a chipper mood again, humming as she sipped her coffee and packed the kids' lunches. I sat across from her at the table, watching her like she was some rare creature I didn't recognize. "Big day today?" I asked, breaking the silence. She glanced at me with a smile, her face perfectly serene. "Just the usual. Meetings, emails, deadlines. Nothing exciting." I nodded, my stomach twisting at how easily the lies rolled off her tongue. I sipped my coffee, letting her think this was just another normal day. But it wasn't. By the time she left the house, I was already on my way to the lawyer's office. I carried the manila folder in one hand like a weapon, its weight more psychological than physical. Every step I took felt heavy, but not uncertain. This was the end of the road, and I was ready for it. My lawyer greeted me with a firm handshake, his smile sharp. "This is more than enough," he said, flipping through the folder's contents one last time. "With this, you'll have full custody of the house and a settlement heavily in your favor." "Good," I said, my voice cold. "Let's get it done." We finalized the papers that morning. By the afternoon, Claire would be served. I waited at home, pacing the living room. The kids would be home from school soon, oblivious to the storm about to hit their lives. I hated that they'd be caught in the fallout, but I couldn't let Claire's choices poison them any longer. When Claire walked through the door that evening, I was sitting in the same chair I'd occupied during our last talk. She froze when she saw me, her usual ease replaced by something wary. "Hey," she said cautiously. "You're home early. Sit down," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Her smile faltered. "What's going on?" "Sit," I repeated, pointing to the chair across from me. She hesitated but complied, lowering herself into the seat. I could see the tension in her posture, the slight tremor in her hands as she clasped them in her lap. I slid the manila folder across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Open it," I said, my tone flat. She did. Her eyes widened as she sifted through the contents, the color draining from her face. The photos, the timestamps, the recordings, every lie she'd told, laid bare in unforgiving detail. "Where did you?" Her voice trailed off, and she looked up at me, panic blooming in her eyes. "It's not what it looks like." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Don't insult me by lying again. I know everything, Claire. Every late meeting, every deadline. I've been watching, listening, following, and now so will everyone else." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to speak, but didn't know what to say. "You threw it all away," I continued, my voice steady but cold. "For what? Him? A cheap thrill? I don't care anymore. You've lost me. You've lost this house, and you've lost the right to call yourself a mother without a fight." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, let me explain." "You don't get to explain," I snapped. "This isn't about what you can say to fix it. It's about what you did, and you can't undo it." The sound of the doorbell cut through the tension like a knife. Claire flinched, her eyes darting to me in confusion. "Go ahead," I said, gesturing to the door. "It's for you." She walked to the door on shaky legs, opening it to find a man in a suit standing there with an envelope. She turned back to me, holding it as though it burned her fingers. "That's your copy of the divorce papers," I said calmly. "You'll also find a list of everything I'm filing for, custody, the house, and more. I hope your boyfriend has a place for you to stay, because you're not welcome here anymore." She collapsed onto the floor, clutching the papers as she sobbed. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel relief. I felt empty, drained of everything she'd taken from me. I walked past her, up the stairs to check on the kids. They were my focus now, the only part of this wreckage worth salvaging. Claire made her choices. Now, she'd have to live with them.